Hello, this is Anne DeGheest. This is a second video on the clinical aspect of the virus on March 19, 2021. So, please check my first video when we talk about the epidemiology. The worldwide cases are back up due to a resurgence in Europe and Brazil. We're facing a third wave. The US is flattening, and we're going to talk in this video about some of the variants that may create a problem in the US. And so I'm going to also talk about how we've discovered that the virus is attacking the heart and is creating long COVID heart damage for everybody who is infected. And we'll do a quick update on the vaccine. So let's talk about the mutation, try to explain what that means. So the SARS virus has 30,000 letters or base of RNA. These are these 4-letter words there that you can create the RNA. And they are the software code to basically make 29 proteins. The one we are talking about is the N501Y. What does that mean? It means there's one of these amino acid asparagine, which is one of the 4 building blocks called N, which is replaced by tyrosine at the 510 position. So that's what makes sense of this alphabet soup of names. And the reason why this one is a bad one is because it allows the virus to be much more effective in binding in the cells. In fact, it's 50% more transmissible, which means that you take if you get exposed, you get a higher load inside your body there, and you probably have an infection that lasts longer. It's unfortunately part of the B1.351 that comes from the UK, which is becoming the dominant form in the US. And the 2 bad ones that we know about, that I'll talk about in a few minutes, the one from South Africa and Brazil. Another mutation that you may want to keep an eye on is what's called the E484K. This is a substitution for the glutamate, the E, for the lysine, the K, at the spike protein 484 positions. And the reason why this is a really bad variant is because it decreases the antibody's ability to bind to the virus and neutralize it before it penetrates the cell. And it's the two big mutations from South Africa and Brazil have that substitution there. We also know that that mutation in South Africa has made the AstraZeneca vaccine ineffective in South Africa. Sinovac also, which is a Chinese vaccine, has failed to neutralize that variant. We also know it's ineffective for the Lilly monoclonal antibody, which is one of the therapy we use in the ICU. We also know that the Pfizer and Moderna are 50% less effective. But the good news is that you get infected, but you don't have the severe cases like the J&J. So these are kind of the alphabet soup of what that means. In the US, unfortunately, we barely sequence 1% of the cases. So therefore, we don't really have a good idea of what's going on, and I think that's an issue in the coming months we need to fix. So let's go back to some of the specifics. South Africa, which is called B1.351, there's a picture of it, was detected on December 18 of last year. It has that mutation at the position 501 there, and so therefore it's much more transmissible. It has also decreased the efficacy. So that's a big worry there, because that mutation has now been detected in the US and in Santa Clara in California, which is where I am. The B117, you're going to hear more and more about it, because that mutation, which is just more infectious and has a 30% higher mortality and severity cases, is now spreading through the US. And one of the problems is that in the traditional infection, you had that sharp peak here there. What's happening with this mutation is that it not only is it more infectious, but it lasts longer in the body. Therefore, that's why there's more risk of other people being infected. Another mutation you're going to hear about is the one from California. And the one from California is called B1427/429, and it comes on from Denmark, and unfortunately in Los Angeles. It has that some of that mutation there that increase the infection in the lung tissues, and also is more transmissible. In fact, when they did some tests in people's nose, they discovered they had 2 times the amount of viral load that we normally would see. And so the big worry about that mutation is that it had some of that component there that allows it to evade the antibody. And that means that for people who had the virus last year and had antibodies, they may get reinfected. And for people who have had the vaccine, they may not be as effective there. And the big concern is that it's now over 50% of the new California cases in California are now have that mutation. Another mutation, so the US has this scaling system there about what's a variant of concern. So last week, Dr. Fauci basically categorized 2 variants of concern. The one from California we just talked about, because the big worry is that it's the antibody escape is what they use it, which means it decreases the effectiveness of the antibody. And the one from New York, started in November, and it came from somebody who was autoimmune suppressed. And so the virus stayed in the body longer and gave more time to mutate. It now has grown to around 60% of the New York new cases and has spread in 14 other states. And if you watch my first video today, you can see that we have a bit of an uptick there in the Northeast corridor in New York and New Jersey. It has that infamous E44K variant we talked about, which is the one that's part of South Africa and Brazil. And then he's had another mutation there on position 477 there that also increased the viral infectivity. So what we don't want is that we have these 2 vaccines who are more infectious and have a partially evade the antibodies. So as we keep track of these variants, if you remember 2 weeks ago, we barely had 1,000 B1.1.7, and now it's basically growing pretty well. But now we can see this other mutation, which we don't want to see, the one from Brazil, and then the one from South Africa, who are also starting to spread. Just a quick reminder that most people, when they are pre-symptomatic, is when they infect other people. So as this mutation get more infections, you should expect an increase in the transmission in the community, which, if you look at my first video, is some of the problem I think that's going on in Europe with that 3rd wave that's happening right now. So I want to change the subject right now and now talk about, I believe, is a ticking bomb, which is we've been focusing on the 540,000 people who have died, which, is traumatic. We've also spent a lot of our energy last year on the 4.5 million people who ended up in the ICU in the hospital there. And then most of the other patients, around 25 million reported cases there, have had mild to moderate cases that were basically taken care of at home. And it is estimated there may be another 50 to 75 million of undiagnosed and unreported cases. So it's a lot of people. The concern is that there is this new condition, we call it post-acute COVID syndromes, or also called the long COVID, where 10 to 30% of anybody, regardless of age, regardless of severity of the acute infection, develop this long-term problem. And it is pretty severe because if you do the math based on the statistics, we could be talking between 8 to 22 million patients in the US may have had some damage. And some they may not be aware, and I have had 2 cases have been reported to me. 2 young men in their 30s, unfortunately parents with small children there, had massive heart attack. And when one unfortunately didn't make it, the other one basically ended up having lost 75% of his heart functions. And they had what's called cardiac myopathy, which is a damage enlargement of the heart. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time on that because I think people, if you have had the virus and you feel fatigue and shortness of breath, you need to get yourself checked. Let me quickly review that. Unfortunately, this virus is like a wrecking ball inside the body. It pretty much attacks every organ in the body, the hearts, the lungs, the kidneys, the brain. I mean, it's just horrendous. And I'm just going to focus on the cardiac one. And what we have discovered, and the papers are coming out, that the virus is directly infecting the heart. And it is a cytotoxicity of the virus into the cell. In addition to that, if you remember, what are the symptoms of this disease? People get hypoxic, which means their level of oxygen is too low in their blood. When you get hypoxic, the tissue cells around the heart or other parts of the body don't get enough oxygen, and they also get damaged and die. And then we know there's the third impact, which is the cytokine inflammation that some people have that create this cascade that, again, can damage the heart. So these are kind of some of the leading reasons why you have this cascade across the cardiovascular system. So not only the heart, but everything that goes into the capillary beds and the brain as a result of that gets impacted. So if you look at the heart alone, you have the acute myocardial injury, which is the virus is inside the heart, and also lack of oxygen. And then over time, you develop this inflammation, and we call it myocardial edema there, where you can see the heart gets enlarged. And unfortunately, it decreases what's called the ejection fraction, which is the amount of blood that comes out of your heart. And you develop, without knowing it, a progressive disease, like similar to congestive heart diseases, that could trigger that heart attack I mentioned earlier. So please get yourself, checked if you have anything like fast abnormal heart rate, your fatigue, and things are not the way it used to be. So data just came out that basically showed that the cardiomyocyte, which are the tissues around the heart, that's what you need to basically push the heart chambers to basically eject the blood. Instead of having these nice little fibers there, which is kind of the muscles there, it's pretty much damaged. And they've shown this from biopsy. They also have shown that you see these nice filaments there, the cardiomyocyte. It's basically shredded. And if you look at some of the prior videos, I gave you some petri dish pictures about basically, the fibers have been the tissue have been totally damaged there. So they've looked at the pathology after autopsy. They've developed what's called engineered heart tissues, and they put the virus into it, and they could see what happened. At the end of the day, what happens? Your heart can no longer have the forces to basically use the muscles of the heart to eject the blood, and you develop, unfortunately, this catastrophic cardiac situation. So a lot of people have developed abnormal heart rhythm. It's been reported up to 20% in some large analysis due to the combination of these events. So if you suddenly start your heart racing and all of that, please check. We also, if you can see some of the picture here, you can see this is the muscle fibers there with the nuclei after that in the petri dish. It's like Cuisinart. It's shredded to pieces there, and the DNA is missing. Another picture there is showing you these long traditional fibers here, and where the muscles contract for the heart. And after the infection, basically, it's no longer able to contract there. So these are real data based on autopsy, MRI studies, and it's coming up from all over different academic centers in the world. So we are confirming more and more long-term damage. A very big study in 60 countries show that people have abnormal echocardiography. Wuhan studies show heart damage after cytokine storm. It's a real thing. Please be alert, avoid the virus, because it's not an issue of mortality, it's an issue of damage to, the heart and other part of your body there. So this is another study showing that 78% using MRI for the heart show abnormality with this inflammation, that swelling of the heart chambers I mentioned. So good news, recent data, still anecdotal, is showing that if you do get vaccinated and you had the infection before, somehow the vaccine trigger antibodies that relieve some of the symptoms that people who have had this problem there. And there's been now several studies. There's still a small study from the UK. There's 2 of them in the UK, and another one from a survivor group, which has over 150,000 survivors. And there's 2 theories. One theory is that there's still some virus inside the body, called the virus reservoir concept, and that it's still there infesting, but not detectable enough, if you do another PCR test. And so the idea is that having that vaccine basically boosts the antibody, and you eliminate the vestige of the virus that may be, still lingering through the body there. Another theory is that as you're getting the vaccination, you stimulate the innate immune response. And the good news about that is that it decreases any type of autoimmune diseases that may have been triggered by the virus, which we believe is one of the mechanisms of action about how people are developing these long-term problems there. So please get vaccinated. This is a study that just showed that people who have been unvaccinated versus people who got vaccinated, is a perception that they're improved. Some people got worse, but most people seem to have improved. Let's talk about the vaccine. What we can measure easily is the antibody. And so when people are saying, well, we have all this virus, the antibody are not working, what's wrong? And the other thing that we don't know, because it's harder to measure, is the T cells. There's one thing for sure, is that the B cells, the antibodies, are the first line of attack when you get infected. But the T cells are the long-term players, and we know is T cells stay in your body longer, and we know that the vaccination and people who have had the virus develop these long-term T cells. So there's a belief that we may still have a good defense against some of these variants. So Moderna, I was in a conference there where Tal Sachs, who is the chief medical officer of Moderna, talked, and he basically confirmed that they have started doing the vaccine trials for children, and they fully enrolled the trials for the 12 to 17-year-old category, and expect the results in a few months, hopefully to get it available by the fall. And there's a second set of trial, which is for 6 months old to 12 years old. They start enrolling 6,000 patients there, and expect the results by early 22. And they're right now experimenting with multiple titration of the drugs, because these are smaller children. Pfizer and Moderna have been developing this platform that allows them to very quickly respond, and they're working with the CDC and the FDA to basically continue tracking the safety data and the profile. But so far, everything looks great. There's still a lot of open question. Do we need a booster shot? How many times do we need a booster shot? So, we're clearly not going to do a booster shot for every variant. And so what they're really developing is a third dose to boost your immune system response, building more antibodies and more T cells, so that you still have a strong response, regardless of the type of variants that continue to evolve. So I want to make the case it's not a specific booster for each of the variants that would be chasing or whack-a-mole type. It's to basically increase our immune system. So I think we're all going in the right direction there. We know from prior coronavirus that people who have been infected had good protection for 1 to 3 years. We don't have enough data yet to know that. And that may be that T cells versus antibody, where we know the antibody are waning off after 6 to 9 months, but the T cells are still there and they last much longer. AstraZeneca, as you may have seen in the news, has had some troubles there. What has happened is that there has been blood clots that have been seen after injection. It's a very low amount of cases. Out of 20 million vaccination, they've had 15 what's called deep vein thrombosis, which are blood clot that gets created in the calf. And this unfortunately can get dislodged and they can go into your lungs. That's called a pulmonary embolism, or they go into your brain, which is, could be like equivalent of a stroke there. And it seems to be targeting people that are women and less than 55 years old. As a result of that, in Europe, a lot of countries put their things on hold. And right now they are reopening it, but only for people who are above 55 years old, because there's still a concern that it could be a risk for the younger population there. Data just came out yesterday that there's 2 teams of medical researchers in Norway and Germany that independently of each other find out that this specific vaccine can trigger a rare autoimmune disorder that can cause blood clots in the brain. And that may be the mechanism of action there. The European Medicine Agency, which is the equivalent of our FDA, has issued a statement this week that the vaccine benefits outweigh the risk, and so therefore it should be released. The Nordic country of Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Finland are still skeptical, and they still keep it on hold until there's more data. And I think AstraZeneca doesn't have the same 94.5% efficacy rate, but it's still very good record as far as decreasing the risk of being in the hospitals, of having some severe outcomes. U.S. has decided to loan 4 million doses of the AstraZeneca to Canada and Mexico to help them in their vaccination program. There's a lot of things going on with vaccine diplomacy there. Pretty much Russia and China are using their vaccine as a way to get contracts and trade benefits across the world. As a result of that, Russia has made a deal with Italy to make 10 million Sputnik V vaccine by the end of this year. Israel, Denmark, and Austria are pulling their forces together so that they can secure adequate vaccine supply. These are small countries, so it's hard for them to get the leverage. There's a concern that China and Russia are overselling the capability of this vaccine. There's a slow Russian adoption, reported to be less than 3% right now. There's a trust issue. And a lot of the doses that have been committed haven't been shipped. And that has been delayed to Brazil, South Korea, and Hungary. The Indo-Pacific region is creating an alliances between the US, Japan, India, and Australia to have an alternative to the Chinese vaccine that's being pushed. So just be aware, we're going to see more of that in the news. Quick therapeutic update. World Health Organization came up with another guidance confirming that hydroxychloroquine has no effect. They also stopped convalescent plasma trials for mild to moderate, so these are outpatient. There's no benefits there. And there's a trial in Colombia. It's 400 patients there with ivermectin. And the data came out saying it did not significantly shorten the hospital duration from 12 to 10 days. A small improvement, but not a major one. A big good news is Eli Lilly has combined 2 existing drugs. I'll let you read that. And the good news is that if it's used in the hospitals there, it cut by 87% the death rate. And so that's great news because we need a lot of different tools in the hospital setting. And the good news is that there was no difference between patients over 65 or under 65 and who had high-risk condition like being overweight, which unfortunately is half the country now. And the U.S. has just about 100,000 doses, to provide it to the hospital setting. So please stay positive, wear a mask, and get vaccinated. Stay healthy. And I hope I'll see you in a couple of weeks.